The cold clang of porcelain echoed through the candlelit dining room, but it wasn't the plates that shattered, it was their delusion. Imagine this, the woman they thought too weak to fight back, now standing tall, her voice calm, her eyes unflinching. The same hands that once trembled from betrayal now laid down justice with elegance and finality. Across from her, two men, once so sure of their lies, now reduced to shadows of themselves, caught in the storm they created. Before this reckoning, there was silence. A hospital room. A woman alone, recovering from a brush with death, unaware that while she fought for her life, the people she trusted most were destroying it behind her back. A husband, a stepfather. Two betrayals wrapped in the same twisted truth. And yet, this is not a story of a woman broken. This is the story of Savannah Ellis, the woman who turned ashes into fire, heartbreak into power, and betrayal into the sharpest weapon. She didn't just survive, she redefined the meaning of strength. What you're about to witness isn't just a tale of revenge. It's a slow burn of justice, of reclaiming identity, of healing through strategy and silence. And it all begins with a knock on a door she was never supposed to open. Are you ready to see what happens when the betrayed becomes the author of her own justice? I'll never forget the way Jacob's face collapsed when he realized the dinner invitation wasn't a step toward forgiveness, but a stage for his final act. The terror washed over him in slow motion, his confident smirk disintegrating into a pale mask of dread. If there were an award for best performance by a husband who thought he got away with it, he would have swept every category without breaking a sweat. I still remember the chill of the hospital floor beneath my bare feet when I decided to leave earlier than planned. The doctors had finally given me the green light after 3 weeks of treatment for pneumonia that had nearly killed me. Mrs. Fletcher, you're not fully recovered yet, but you can continue your recovery at home. Dr. Weston had said with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. I nodded politely, but inside I was vibrating with anticipation. The sterile white walls of that hospital room had become a prison. I craved familiarity, the scent of home, the creak of the hardwood floor, the view from our bedroom window. Most of all, I longed for Jacob's arms around me, his voice telling me how much he'd missed me. That thought alone had kept me going during the worst nights, when every breath felt like a battle. I was so eager to surprise Jacob, my husband of 9 years, that I didn't even call ahead God how I wished. I had the cab pulled up to our craftsman-style home in Asheville, the dream house we'd bought using part of my inheritance after my grandfather passed away 2 years ago. I remember thinking how strangely quiet everything felt. Jacob's Audi was in the driveway, which wasn't unusual for a Wednesday afternoon. He often worked from home. What caught me off guard was my stepfather's Lexus parked right behind it. Greg had been helping out since I got sick, supposedly checking on the house and sometimes bringing Jacob meals. He'd visited me in the hospital just yesterday without mentioning he'd stop by today, but I actually felt relieved at the thought of having them both there. It would make my surprise homecoming even better. I paid the driver and wheeled my small suitcase up the walkway, still feeling weak but energized by the idea of sleeping in my own bed. That night, using my key, I entered as quietly as possible thinking, maybe I could really surprise them. The air hit me like a wall, too still, too perfect, like the house was holding its breath. Something felt off, but I shook it off as post-hospital anxiety. My body was fragile, but my heart was open. Vulnerable in a way I hadn't realized until that moment. I had imagined this return so many times in my head. The smile on Jacob's face, Greg's relieved hug. I never once considered a version where that front door would become the threshold of heartbreak. The house was eerily silent, except was that laughter coming from upstairs. I froze my hands still on the door. Knob, that wasn't TV laughter. It was Greg's laugh. That distinctive chuckle he let out when he was feeling flirtatious, I'd heard it countless times at family dinners when he'd had one too many glasses of bourbon. No, this can't be real, I whispered to myself, setting my suitcase down. Maybe the medications were still messing with my head. I moved toward the staircase, gripping the banister, tighter than usual, still weak from my illness. Each step felt like a mile. As I climbed, my heart beginning to pound so hard that my recovering lungs burned. The master bedroom door was partially open, and before I even reached the top of the stairs, I heard it, my stepfather's voice, breathless and playful, saying words I would never be able to forget. She doesn't ever have to know, Jake. What happens when Savannah's away between us? Jake, the nickname. Only I called him. I reached the doorway and pushed it open with trembling fingers. There are moments when your brain refuses to accept what your eyes are seeing, when reality is too grotesque to be true and your mind scrambles to rewrite it, reshape it, into something less soul-crushing. But this wasn't a hallucination. This wasn't fever or trauma or imagination. It was real, visceral, obscene, and right in front of me. The sight before me looked like something ripped from a nightmare. My 57-year-old stepfather, Martin, was straddling my husband on our bed, his shirt unbuttoned, his hands gripping his waist. They were so wrapped up in each other that they didn't even notice me until I made a sound, not a scream or a shout, but a pathetic, wounded whimper that slipped out of my throat without permission. They both turned their faces. I saw their joy freeze, snap like glass, eyes wide, mouths parting in disbelief. That instant, it carved itself into my soul. Their guilt didn't come in tears or apologies. It came in stunned silence, and I felt like I was watching strangers. People I once loved, now twisted into something unrecognizable, shifting instantly from pleasure to shock. Jacob practically threw Martin off him onto the mattress. Savannah. Oh my God, you're home. He stammered frantically, pulling the sheet over himself. This isn't. I can explain. My stepfather clutched at his open shirt, his face a mask of shock, but without the slightest trace of shame, at least not enough of it, darling. You were supposed to be in the hospital until Friday. He said, as if my early release was somehow my fault, as if I was the one interrupting them. I couldn't breathe. The pneumonia that had nearly taken my life was nothing compared to the suffocating weight of this betrayal. My husband and my own stepfather, together in my bed. While I was fighting for my life, how long I managed to choke out, gripping the door frame to keep from collapsing. They exchanged a quick look. That told me everything. This wasn't the first time. Savannah, you're still recovering. Let's talk when you're stronger. My stepfather actually had the audacity to say, now fiddling with the buttons of his shirt, get out. I screamed, the force of it sending me into a coughing fit that doubled me over. Both of you. Get out. Jacob jumped up, pulling on his pants. Babe. Please let me explain. It was a mistake. A terrible mistake. A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill, Jacob. I said, suddenly feeling an icy cold clarity replace the shock. This was a choice, a disgusting choice you both made repeatedly while I was fighting to breathe in a hospital bed. My stepfather stepped toward me, reaching out as if to comfort me, as if he had any right. Savannah, sweetie, you're overwrought. You need to sit down before you collapse. I backed away from his touch like it was poison. Don't you dare pretend to care about my health? Now? How could you? My own stepfather. A surge of grief and fury twisted inside me. Every memory of childhood, hugs and whispered bedtime stories. His arms, once the safest place during thunderstorms, now felt like the coils of a snake. His voice, once a balm when I scraped my knee or cried over a broken toy, now scraped across my heart like sandpaper. My throat tightened, a scream swelling inside, but all I could manage was a choked breath. My body was fighting pneumonia, but my soul, it was bleeding out, right there on the hardwood floor of the home I no longer recognized. Turning to ash, my chest etched with each shallow breath, not just from pneumonia, but from the raw, searing pain of knowing the two people I trusted most had been lying to my face. I wanted to scream until the walls cracked, until they felt even a fraction of the devastation clawing me apart from the inside. The look that passed between them confirmed my worst suspicions. I could see it in their eyes. This wasn't just a one-time thing. This had history. I turned and stumbled down the stairs, nearly falling in my weakened state. I could hear them both calling after me, making excuses, begging me to calm down and talk. But there was nothing to say, nothing that could undo what I'd seen or erase the betrayal slicing through me like glass. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, a wave of dizziness crashed over me, and I sank onto the last step, my body betraying me just like they had. The coolness of the banister, the silence in the hallway, the framed photos lining the stairwell, they all blurred as my vision dimmed. I pressed my forehead to my knees, desperate to hold myself together. I had never felt so abandoned, so violated, not even when my grandfather passed. This was a living grief, one that stared back at me with Jacob's pleading eyes and Martin's guilty silence. I heard them coming down behind me, both frantically, dressing Savannah. "Please, you're still sick. Let me drive you back to the hospital," Jacob pleaded, reaching for me. I looked up at him. This man I'd loved since college, this man who had held my hand through my grandfather's funeral, this man who had promised to love me in sickness and in health. And next to him stood my stepfather, the man who taught me to be strong, to value myself, to never let anyone disrespect me. "Don't touch me," I whispered, too weak to shout anymore, "either of you," in that moment. As I sat there trembling with fever and betrayal, something inside me hardened. I knew exactly what I was going to do. They thought I was weak. They thought they could take advantage of my illness. My trust, they had no idea what was coming. My grandfather always told me, "Savannah, being born wealthy is luck, but staying wealthy is strategy." As I looked at the two people who had betrayed me most profoundly, I remembered his words and felt something like his strength pour into me. "I need to lie down," I said quietly, "and then we're going to talk about what happens next." Neither of them knew that when I said what happens next, I wasn't talking about reconciliation or even confrontation. I was talking about retribution. The next few days were a blur of tears, arguments, and pathetic excuses. Jacob moved into the guest room, at my insistence, while my stepfather, God, I could barely even call him that anymore, returned to his townhouse across town. The story they crafted was so predictable. It was almost insulting. It just happened. Savannah, Jacob said, pacing our living room the day after I caught them, "I was lonely and worried about you, and your stepfather was here all the time, and one night we had too much wine, and he trailed off, running his hands through his hair, like he always did when he was lying, and what, Jacob, you accidentally fell on top of my stepfather." The words hit me like a punch to the chest, absurd, rehearsed, cowardly. I stood frozen in the middle of our home, the same one we built with whispered dreams and late-night plans, now echoing with betrayal. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. For how long has this just happened? My voice was from coughing and crying. He couldn't look me in the eye. A few months, I did the math in my head. My pneumonia diagnosis had only been 3 weeks ago. This had started well before I got sick. It started at your grandmother's memorial service. My stepfather confessed when he came over uninvited, bringing soup as if chicken noodle could somehow fix what he'd shattered. We were both so devastated, Savannah. You were busy with the arrangements and Jacob, and I found comfort in talking about Eleanor. One thing led to another. Something inside me cracked, not with volume, but with a silence so profound it screamed. My grandmother, the woman who had practically raised me, whose photo still hung by the fireplace, they desecrated her memory with their secrets. The thought of them leaning on each other for comfort, while I stood alone greeting mourners, made my skin crawl. My grandmother's memorial, while I was organizing the service for my beloved Nana, greeting mourners, making sure her favorite songs were played. My husband and my stepfather were what, sneaking off to comfort each other. I threw the soup against the wall, watching it drip down the expensive wallpaper I'd chosen when we moved in. The crash gave me a brief, bitter satisfaction. My hands were shaking violently as I stood there. I remember screaming internally, screaming so loud in my mind that it drowned out everything. The broth trickling down the wall looked like something symbolic, like the rot that had crept into my life without me noticing. Breathing in ragged gasps, the scent of chicken broth hung heavy in the air, nauseating and sour mingling, with the sharp sting of betrayal that burned deeper than any physical wound. I felt like I was drowning in a nightmare, each second stretching into an eternity of rage and heartbreak. "So, you've been sleeping with my husband for almost 2 years?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet since Nana died. He had the decency to look ashamed, then not continuously. "We tried to stop many times. It's just get out," I said, pointing to the door. "I can't even look at you right now." Both of them kept coming back, though, Jacob, with flowers and empty promises that it would never happen again. My stepfather, with tears and reminders of everything he'd done for me, as if helping raise me gave him the right to sleep with my husband. They were so concerned with securing my forgiveness, so desperate to make themselves feel better, that neither of them noticed I was making phone calls when they weren't around. Neither questioned why I wanted my laptop, even though I was supposed to be resting. I spent a week pretending to consider their apologies, while secretly contacting my grandfather's attorney. Douglas Remy Papa had always trusted Douglas implicitly, and now I understood why. When I explained everything to him over a secure line, his response was measured but supportive. "Savannah, I'm deeply sorry for this betrayal. Your grandfather would be outraged," he said, his voice grave. "What would you like to do?" That was the right question. Not "are you sure not?" Maybe you should think about forgiveness, just a straightforward acknowledgement that action was necessary. "I want to change my will and all my financial arrangements," I replied, "and I need to know exactly what my stepfather's financial situation is." Douglas was silent for a moment. "Your stepfather's situation? May I ask why?" I took a deep breath. My grandfather had left him well provided for, but I'd always wondered if there was more to it. He started living much more extravagantly after his death than he ever had when he was alive. Another pause. "Savannah, I think we should meet in person. There are some things about your grandparents' financial arrangements that, well, your grandfather wanted you to know eventually." That conversation set everything in motion. While I pretended to be weighing things with Jacob and my stepfather, I was actually gathering information and making plans. Jacob would come home from work, bringing my favorite takeout or a new book, sitting on the edge of the bed with that hangdog expression. "I love you, Savannah, only you." It was just physical with your stepfather, meaningless, he'd say, as if that somehow made it better. I'd look at him with tears in my eyes, real tears, because despite everything, this betrayal was gutting me from the inside out, and I'd say, "I need more time, Jacob. This isn't something I can just get over." He'd nod understandingly, thinking my hesitation was part of the forgiveness process. He never once considered that I might be planning something else entirely. My stepfather was just as fooled. He'd call daily, leaving tearful voicemails. When I wouldn't answer, "Savannah, please, I know what I did was unforgivable, but you're all I have, we're family blood. Please, let me explain in person." After a week, I finally agreed to see him for tea. He arrived bearing an expensive piece, offering a Burberry scarf I'd admired months ago, and launched straight into a well-rehearsed speech about mistakes and forgiveness. I let him talk, watching his face closely. This man, who had taught me how would to change a flat tire, who had held me when my first boyfriend shattered my heart, who had walked me down the aisle when my grandfather was too ill to do it himself. This man had betrayed me in the most fundamental way imaginable, and yet, even as I sat there, a small part of me whispered doubts. Not doubts about their guilt, but doubts about myself. About whether I could keep the mask on long enough, whether I could pretend convincingly enough to coax out the information I needed, whether the storm raging inside me would give me away. He still looked like the man who once called me kiddo and cheered the loudest at my college graduation. And yet now, every word from his mouth felt like a carefully sharpened knife dressed in sentimentality. What if he saw through my mask? What if Jacob sensed the shift in my tone at night? I lay awake, replaying every word we exchanged, terrified they would catch a crack in my facade. Before I was ready, my heart ached with a shameful longing for the days when Jacob's touch felt safe and my stepfather's voice felt like home. The war inside me threatened to unravel everything. But I forced myself to keep smiling, to keep lying. "Martin." I interrupted his monologue, using the word deliberately to see his reaction. He brightened instantly, hope lighting up his eyes at the familiar address. "I need to understand something. You and Papa were married for 30 years. Did you ever cheat on him?" The question caught him off guard. He blinked rapidly, setting his tit down with a faint clatter. "Of course not. Your grandfather and I had a wonderful marriage." "Then, why of all the men in the world? Why Jacob?" He looked down, fidgeting with his wedding ring, which he still wore 2 years after my grandfather's death. "I don't know, Savannah. It wasn't planned. Jacob was there." He was attentive. He understood what I was going through. Losing Eleanor, his voice trailed off lamely. What he didn't say, what he couldn't admit, was something I'd already suspected. My stepfather had always been jealous of me, of my relationship with my grandfather, of my inheritance of my marriage to Jacob, who was successful on his own, but also gained so much for my family's wealth and connections. Jealousy cloaked in concern, competition disguised as affection. Now it all made sense. The sideways glances, the passive-aggressive remarks, the way he inserted himself into every major moment of my adult life. My whole world had been infested with rot, and I hadn't seen it until it was too late. Little did my stepfather know that, as we sat there drinking Earl Grey, Douglas Remy was uncovering evidence that would change everything, evidence that would give me exactly what I needed to set my plan in motion. I looked at my stepfather's tear-streaked face and felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. "I need more time, Martin, but I think we can work through this." Eventually, the relief on his face was unmistakable, and he reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "Oh, Savannah, thank you. You won't regret giving us another chance." He was wrong about that. They would both regret it deeply. I just needed a little more time to set everything up perfectly. The meeting with Douglas Remy changed everything. His office always reminded me of my grandfather. The same leather-bound books, the scent of expensive cologne and paper, the quiet competence that made you feel safer. "Just by being there, Savannah, I've completed the investigation you requested," he said, sliding a folder across his mahogany desk, "and I'm afraid the results are troubling." I opened the folder with steady hands. Inside were bank statements, property transfers, and legal documents that told a story my grandfather had hidden from me. "Your stepfather was having an affair during your grandfather's illness," Douglas said gently, "not with Jacob, but with your grandfather's business partner, Leon Barnes." I felt the blood drain from my face. It was like being punched in the chest all over again. The betrayal wasn't new, but its depth, its layers, kept expanding like a bottomless pit. Leon Barnes, the man who used to ruffle my hair at Sunday brunch, who gifted me a charm bracelet when I turned 16. I couldn't process it. How deeply the deception had rooted itself into every part of my family. Leon had been like an uncle to me. Growing up, he'd even been a pallbearer at Papa's funeral. "There's more," Douglas continued. "Your grandfather discovered the affair about 6 months before he died. He changed his will to significantly reduce your stepfather's inheritance, placing much of it in a secondary trust that you would control. When you turned 35, I was 33 now. However," Douglas said, his voice hardening, "the updated will mysteriously disappeared after your grandfather's death. The version that was executed was an older one, which left your stepfather with direct control of nearly 40% of the estate. I've always had suspicions, but no proof." My hands tightened on the folder. And now, Douglas said with grim satisfaction, "we have evidence that your stepfather and Leon conspired to hide the updated will. There are text messages, Savannah, explicit ones, discussing how to make sure the new will never saw the light of day." I thought I couldn't feel more betrayed, but I was wrong. My stepfather hadn't just cheated with my husband, he'd cheated on my dying grandfather and potentially stolen millions from my inheritance. A hot wave of sickness rolled through me. Bile rising in my throat as my mind flooded with images of my grandfather lying weak in bed, trusting the man he loved most while he plotted behind his back. The thought of him spending his last days, believing in his loyalty, that trust, so pure, so undeserved, made the betrayal feel almost criminal. And it was. Every memory I had of my grandfather's final months now felt distorted, tainted. I had held his hand through his decline, whispered reassurances, while Martin had been whispering something very different to someone else. While he orchestrated this betrayal, made my heart clench so violently it hurt to breathe. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. Douglas leaned forward. "That depends on what you want, Savannah. We have enough evidence to challenge the will's execution, to potentially file criminal charges for fraud, but legal battles are messy, public, and can drag on for years." I sat back thinking of my grandfather, how he always preferred elegant solutions to brute force. "What would you suggest a different approach?" Douglas said, with a small smile, "One that gets you what you deserve without the mess of a court battle over the next hour." We outlined a plan that was both simple and devastating. First, I would change my own will, removing both Jacob and my stepfather as beneficiaries. Instead, I would leave my personal fortune still substantial, despite my stepfather's theft, to a foundation in my grandfather's name. Second, using the evidence Douglas had gathered, I would confront my stepfather privately with an ultimatum: return control of the misappropriated assets, or face public exposure and criminal charges. Third, and this part was particularly satisfying, I would work with my financial team to gradually extract Jacob from the business partnerships he'd formed through my family's connections, partnerships that were the source of most of his current wealth. "Are you sure about this?" Savannah Douglas asked as we finalized the details. "Once you start, there's no going back." I looked at the photos of my stepfather and Leon. The bank transfers, the evidence of their betrayal of my grandfather when he was at his most vulnerable. The faces in those photos were familiar but foreign, distorted by secrets, painted with greed. My hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but with a clarity so sharp it was almost painful. I had spent too long in survival mode. Now I was stepping into control. I was doing what my grandfather would have done, what he trusted me to do. I'm sure I said they thought I was weak because I was sick, because I was heartbroken. They've been underestimating me my entire life. It's time they learned who I really am. I left Douglas's office with a renewed sense of purpose. That night when Jacob came home, I suggested we try to have dinner together, a first step toward healing. I called it. He was pathetically grateful, bringing an expensive bottle of wine and wearing the shirt I'd always said brought out his eyes. We ate by candlelight, and I let him hold my hand across the table, watching him relax as he believed he was being forgiven. The flicker of hope in his eyes was almost pitiable. He looked like the man I used to love, the man who had once danced barefoot with me in our kitchen. But now, every gesture, every word, felt like a rehearsed line in a play, only I knew the ending to. "I've been thinking," I said, tracing the rim of my wine glass, "about our future." His face brightened. "Me too, Savannah. I promise you we can get past this. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you." I smiled slightly. "That's what I'm counting on. But I need you to do something for me." "First, anything," he said eagerly. "I want us to update our wills and financial documents after coming so close to dying." It made me realize how unprepared we are for the worst. He blinked, clearly not expecting this turn in the conversation. "Our wills, sure, if that would make you feel better. But you're fine now, right?" "The doctor said you've mostly recovered." "Mostly," I said, letting a hint of vulnerability creep into my voice. "But it scared me, Jacob, and with everything that's happened between us, I just want to know our affairs are in order, that we're taking care of each other." No matter what, he agreed readily, never realizing he was signing the first document of his own financial demise. The next day I invited my stepfather for lunch. She seemed encouraged by our team meeting and arrived with another piece, offering a photo album she'd put together of our happiest family memories. "I thought we could look at these together," he said. "Hopefully remember the good times." I set the album aside. "Maybe later. Martin, first I'd like to discuss something important with you. Something about Papa." His smile faltered. "What about your grandfather?" "About his will, actually. And about Leon Barnes." His face went completely white. It was answer enough. "I know everything," I continued calmly, "about the affair, about the changed will, about how you made sure Papa's final wishes weren't honored." "Savannah, that's not... You don't understand," he stammered. "I understand perfectly." I cut him off. "You betrayed Papa when he was dying. You stole what he wanted me to have, and then, not satisfied with just betraying him, you decided to betray me too by sleeping with my husband." Tears welled in his eyes, but I was long past being moved by them. "What are you going to do?" he whispered. I slid a document across the table. "You're going to sign this. It transfers control of the disputed assets back to me, as Papa intended. You'll keep enough to live comfortably, but nothing more. And if I don't," he challenged, a flash of the manipulative man beneath the paternal facade, "then Douglas Remy files charges for fraud and theft. Then every friend you have, every social connection you've cultivated learns what you did to your dying partner and then to your step-granddaughter. Then you lose everything anyway, plus your freedom and your reputation." He stared at me for a long moment, seeing something in my face. He'd never seen before the steel beneath the softness, the utter determination he knew. I wasn't bluffing with a shaking hand. He signed the document as he did. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a hollow acknowledgement that justice was being served. My grandfather had trusted me to carry his legacy, and now I would honor that trust. The trap was set. All that remained was to spring it at exactly the right moment. 3 weeks later, I invited both Jacob and my stepfather to our home for dinner. They arrived separately, both clearly confused by the joint invitation, but hopeful. It signaled forgiveness. Jacob had spent the past weeks believing our marriage was on the mend, unaware that I'd been systematically removing him from my financial affairs. My stepfather had been subdued since signing the documents, watching me warily, but clinging to the possibility of reconciliation. I'd prepared the dining room carefully. My grandfather's favorite classical music playing softly, his portrait prominently displayed, candles lit on the table. He'd gifted us for our 5th anniversary. I wanted his presence to fill the room for what was about to happen. "Thank you both for coming," I said, as we sat down to the meal I'd had catered. I wasn't about to cook for them myself. I thought it was time we all talked together. They exchanged nervous glances. My stepfather took a large sip of wine. "Savannah, this is a good sign. Isn't it?" Jacob ventured. "That you're ready to talk things through with both of us?" I smiled thinly, in a manner of speaking. The first course was served in uncomfortable silence. I waited until they'd both taken several bites before I spoke again. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past weeks about betrayal, about consequences, about what my grandfather would have wanted me to do. In this situation," my stepfather set down his fork with a clatter. "Savannah, I thought we had resolved. We resolved nothing." I cut him off. "You signed a document returning what you stole. That's not resolution, that's just the beginning." Jacob looked between us, confused. "Stole? What are you talking about?" So I told him everything about my stepfather's affair with Leon, about the changed will, about the fraud he'd committed. His eyes widened with each revelation. "You didn't know?" I asked him, watching his reaction carefully. "Of course not," he exclaimed. "Savannah, I swear, I knew nothing about any of this." My stepfather was staring daggers at me. "This is private family business. There was no need to tell him." "Oh, I think my husband deserves to know exactly who he's been sleeping with," I replied coldly. "A man who cheated on his dying partner and then stole from his own step-granddaughter." I let the silence stretch between us, savoring the sharp crack of their illusions, shattering like glass in the candle-lit room. My voice came out low, steady, each word a deliberate blade, carving through their hopes of forgiveness. I wanted them to feel every ounce of the humiliation, to watch their faces crumble as I laid bare their secrets. Jacob had the decency to look ashamed. His face turned pale, his hands tightening around the stem of his wineglass like he needed something to ground him. I saw his jaw tremble, not from rage, but realization. The walls he'd built around his excuses were collapsing. My stepfather just looked angry, the mask of contrition slipping completely away. "Fine," he snapped. "I made mistakes, terrible ones, but don't act so innocent, Savannah. You've always had everything handed to you. Your grandfather's favor, his money, his business connections. Some of us had to fight for what we got." I laughed, the sound brittle even to my own ears. "Fight? Is that what you call sleeping with Papa's best friend, and then my husband? That's not fighting, Martin, that's betraying." I turned to Jacob, who was looking increasingly uncomfortable. "And you? Did you think I wouldn't find out what you've been doing with Lexington Partners?" His face palled. Lexington Partners was the venture capital firm he'd been introduced to through my family connections. He'd recently secured a major position there, or so he thought. "What do you mean?" he asked cautiously. "I mean that Elijah Lexington and I had a very interesting conversation last week about how you've been exaggerating your role in securing the Pine Ridge deal, about how you've been taking credit for connections that came through my family. That's not true." He protested, but his eyes darted away. A tell he'd always had since I first met him. "Elijah and I have a great professional relationship. Had I corrected you, had a great professional relationship before I showed him the evidence that you'd been inflating your contributions while diminishing mine in your reports. Before I reminded him who actually brought Pine Ridge to the table. The color drained from his face. You didn't? I did. You're being removed from the Lexington team, effective immediately. He sank back in his chair, shoulders slumping like a balloon losing air. For a moment, he looked like the boy I met in college. Brilliant, ambitious, but terrified of not being enough. And now, exposed. The quiet devastation in his eyes didn't stir pity. It confirmed what I already knew. He had built his world on borrowed ladders, and I had just kicked the last one out. The announcement. Goes out tomorrow. My stepfather actually smiled, seemingly pleased to see Jacob taken down a notch. His satisfaction was short-lived, and I continued. Turning to him should check your social calendar. You might find it suddenly empty. He frowned. What are you talking about? I'm talking about how Margot Ellis, Trina Haley, and the rest of your civic league now know exactly what kind of friend you are. The kind who sleeps with his dying partner's closest friend, then steals from his own step-granddaughter. Then sleeps with his step-granddaughter's husband. You had no right. He gasped. I had every right. I countered. You destroyed our family? Did you think there wouldn't be consequences? The dinner continued in tense silence, broken only by the occasional attempt at defense from one of them, quickly shut down by another revelation from me. I laid it all out: how Jacob's career was effectively over in our city. How my stepfather's social standing was irreparably damaged. How the financial arrangements they'd both depended on were now changed forever. Their expressions shifted from confusion to horror to a hollow kind of grief. But this grief wasn't about losing me. It was about losing what I gave them: status, security, reputation. And they realized too late that those things were never truly theirs to begin with. Why are you doing this? Jacob finally asked, his voice breaking. If you hate us this much, why not just divorce me and cut your stepfather off? Why all this? He gestured at the elaborate dinner, the careful staging. I took a sip of my water, looking at them both over the rim of the glass. Because I wanted you to understand exactly what you've lost. I wanted you to see it all disappearing. While sitting at the table, my grandfather gave us, looking at his portrait, hearing his favorite music. I set the glass down carefully. My grandfather taught me that wealth isn't just about money. It's about connections, reputation, standing. You've both lost all of those things. Now you can keep the house, Jacob. It's a small price to pay to be rid of you and Martin. You'll have your condo and a modest income. You'll both have the essentials was for survival, but nothing more. You can't do this, my stepfather whispered. But there was defeat in his voice. He knew I already had. The divorce papers are ready for your signature. I told Jacob. Your personal belongings have been packed. A car will take you to a hotel tonight. He stared at me, this man I had once loved with my whole heart. Savannah, please, we can work through this. I made a terrible mistake, but I still love you. Something twisted painfully in my chest. The last remnant of what I'd once felt for him. If you ever loved me at all, you'll sign the papers without contesting anything. You'll take what I'm offering and disappear from my life by the end of the evening. They both understood the full extent of what they'd lost. Jacob left with a suitcase and the promise to sign the divorce papers. My stepfather departed in tears, finally comprehending that our relationship would never recover. As I closed the door behind them, I felt no joy, no triumph, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that justice, cold and precise, had been served. It's been 18 months since that dinner. 18 months of rebuilding myself from the ashes of betrayal. 18 months of learning who Savannah Ellis truly is without a cheating husband or a treacherous stepfather surrounding her. The divorce was finalized quickly. Jacob knew better than to fight it. He signed everything without argument. Taking only what I offered last, I heard he'd moved to Minneapolis trying to rebuild his career from scratch. Without my family's connections or financial support, he's struggling. Sometimes I see his LinkedIn updates desperately trying to sound successful while taking positions far below his previous status. I feel nothing when I see them, not satisfaction, not pity, just emptiness. My stepfather's situation is similarly diminished. He keeps his condo and has enough for basic needs, but his social circle has contracted to almost nothing. Those civic league men he so desperately wanted to impress now barely acknowledge his existence. He sends cards on my birthday and Christmas, each one filled with pleas for reconciliation. I returned them unopened. As for me, I've thrived in ways I never expected, the foundation I established in my grandfather's name. The Elliot Ellis Foundation for Ethical Business Practices has become my passion. We work with companies to establish transparency in their operations and governance. The irony isn't lost on me using money that was nearly stolen from me to promote honesty and integrity in business. I sold the house in Savannah. Too many painful memories haunted its halls. Now I live in a sunlit apartment overlooking Central Park. It's smaller but filled only with things and people I truly care about. I've become more selective about everything: my possessions, my business associates, my friends. Douglas Remy still handles my legal affairs, but he's become a friend as well. Sometimes we meet for lunch and talk about my grandfather, the real man, not the sanitized version my stepfather tried to create after his death. Through Douglas, I've reconnected with parts of my grandfather's life and legacy I never knew existed. Your grandfather would be proud. Douglas told me recently over coffee, not just of how you handled the situation, but of who you've become because of it. I'm not sure if that's true. Part of me wonders if Papa would have preferred mercy to justice. But then I remember his face when he talked to principals about standing up for what's right. Even when it's painful, I have to believe he would understand why I did what I did. Last month, I received an email from Jacob. He's engaged again to someone much younger. Of course, he wanted to clear the air before starting his new life. I read his lengthy apology with detached interest, like reviewing a contract for a business I no longer own. His words seemed sincere enough, but they touched nothing in me. I replied with a simple, "I wish you well," and blocked his address. My stepfather is more persistent. He showed up at my apartment building, unannounced last week, convincing the doorman to call up. I agreed to meet him in the lobby, neutral territory. "You look wonderful," he said, his eyes hungry for connection. He's aged dramatically in the past year and a half, the lines around his mouth deeper, his hair more gray than blonde now. "Thank you," I replied, keeping my distance. "What do you want, Martin?" The use of his first name made him flinch, but he pressed on. "I miss you, Savannah. You're my only stepchild." This arrangement is killing me. For a moment, seeing him diminished like this, I felt a flicker of pity, but pity isn't forgiveness, and it isn't enough to rebuild what he destroyed. You should have thought of that before you betrayed Papa, before you betrayed me. Everyone makes mistakes, he pleaded, even you, Savannah, someday. You might need forgiveness too. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in months. You're right, everyone does make mistakes, but what you did wasn't a mistake. It was a series of calculated choices that prioritized your desires over the people who loved you. I turned to leave, then paused. I don't hate you anymore. That's the best I can offer right now. It was true. The burning hatred had cooled, leaving behind a calm certainty that I'd done what needed to be done. I sleep well at night. I laugh often. I've even started dating again, cautiously, selectively, with my eyes wide open. Sometimes I look back at that day in the hospital, when Dr. Barnes told me I could go home early if I'd called ahead. If I'd stayed one more day, how different would my life be? I might still be married to a man who betrayed me at my most vulnerable. I might still be manipulated by a stepfather who saw me as competition rather than as a stepdaughter. Instead, I'm standing on my own, stronger, wiser, and finally free from the web of lies they wove around me, dear friend. Sometimes life cracks us open in the most brutal ways, revealing truths we wish we could unsee. But remember this: what breaks you doesn't have to define you. It can forge you into someone stronger, someone who knows their worth beyond anyone's betrayal. As the Stoics remind us, you have power over your mind. So the story is over, our wonderful friends. Are you still here at this hour? If you've made it this far, then something must have deeply resonated with you. Somewhere between the pain and the healing, between the betrayal and the justice, something has touched your heart. Let's take a moment and breathe together. Because this wasn't just a story about infidelity or revenge, it was about rediscovery. About reclaiming your power when it feels like the very people you trusted most have broken you. Savannah's journey is proof that even in our most shattered state, we can choose not just to survive, but to rise. To rise with clarity, with strength, and with dignity. Maybe you've been through something that felt impossible to bear. Maybe someone close hurt you in ways you never thought they would. And maybe, just maybe, you questioned your own worth because of it. But here's the truth, whispered through every line of this story. What breaks you doesn't have to define you. It can forge you. As Marcus Aurelius once said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That strength isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a quiet moment at a table where you finally say, no more. Savannah didn't just win. She rebuilt. She reclaimed her story, her legacy, and most importantly, her self-worth. And so can you. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own strength or gave you hope, please like, share, and subscribe. Let's keep this community growing, filled with stories that don't shy away from the mess, but instead lead us through it to something honest and empowering. Thank you for being here. You deserve a life that reflects your worth. And never forget that worth was never theirs to define.